Daniel slowly lowered his gaze to the Queen's extended hand. The moment felt unreal. He had come to save children from a burning ship, not to stand in a royal hall with the fate of an entire alliance hanging over him. His pulse quickened, and he could feel the eyes of every guard, every child, and the Queen herself watching. He placed his hand in hers. The touch was warm and steady, and for a moment, the noise of the hangar faded away. A low hum filled the air as a thin band of light formed around their clasped hands. The Queen's eyes met his, and though their languages were different, he understood this was the sealing of the sacred bond. The light faded, but the guards lowered their weapons completely. Some even struck their chests in a salute. The children smiled, speaking quickly among themselves. One boy tugged at Daniel's sleeve and pointed toward the grand doors at the far end of the hangar. The Queen gestured for him to follow, her gown trailing softly behind her as she walked. They entered a long corridor lined with banners. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of unfamiliar flowers. Soldiers stood at attention along the walls, their armor polished to a mirror finish. At the end of the corridor, a vast chamber opened before them. Golden light spilled from high windows, illuminating a table covered with maps and holographic displays. The Queen motioned for Daniel to stand beside her at the table. She spoke in her own language, and a translator drone hovered close to his ear. She told him of the war that had erupted without warning. The burning ship had been carrying the children to safety when it was attacked. They had no proof yet, but she believed it was the work of a rival empire. Daniel studied the maps. The glowing lines showed battle zones spreading across multiple star systems. The enemy's forces were larger, but the Queen's people held the advantage in certain sectors. Still, their supply routes were vulnerable. The attack on the children's ship had been meant to break morale. Daniel realized his rescue had disrupted that plan. The Queen's advisors entered the chamber. Their expressions were cautious as they looked at him. Some spoke quietly to the Queen, and she replied firmly. The translator told him she was insisting that the human who had saved their children deserved a seat at the council table, at least until the crisis ended. This was not a request, it was an order. Reluctantly, the advisors agreed. Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle on him. He was now part of something far larger than he had imagined. The Queen handed him a small metallic emblem shaped like a star. She said it marked him as a guardian under royal protection, granting him access to restricted areas and the right to speak in council. They left the chamber together, returning to the hangar where the children waited. One of the smallest ran up to him and wrapped her arms around his leg. The Queen smiled faintly at the sight. She told him that the sacred bond was not just an honor, but a promise to protect and to be protected. It was a bond that could never be broken. Daniel looked once more at the emblem in his hand. He thought about the burning ship, the choking smoke, and the small voices calling out in fear. He had acted without thinking, driven by the instinct to save lives. Now that choice had tied him to an alien queen, a kingdom at war, and a future he could not yet see. Asterisk, the royal flagship moved through deep space with silent precision. Daniel stood near one of the large observation windows, watching the stars drift by. The emblem of the sacred bond rested against his chest. It felt heavier than its size suggested, as though the metal itself carried the weight of his new responsibility. Behind him, the Queen entered quietly. She did not wear her ceremonial gown now, but a simpler outfit of deep green and silver. Her steps were light, yet the guards near the door straightened when she passed. She came to stand beside him, her gaze fixed on the same stars he was watching. The translator drone hovered between them, but for a moment she did not speak. Then she told him that a summit would be held on the capital world in 2 days. Leaders from across the allied systems would be present. The sacred bond had made him more than a rescuer in their eyes. To them, he was now a symbol of unity. Daniel listened carefully. He had no training for politics or diplomacy, but he understood the importance of appearances. If his presence could strengthen the Queen's position in the war, then he would not refuse. Still, he could not shake the thought that the enemy would see him as a threat now. That made him a target. The Queen seemed to sense his concern. She assured him that her personal guard would protect him, but also warned that the rival empire was cunning. They might not attack openly, but they would try to undermine him in other ways. She told him to trust no one outside her circle until the summit was over. Later in the training hall, Daniel met Captain Varric, leader of the Queen's Guard. Varric was tall, with gray skin and sharp, intelligent eyes. He placed a curved blade in Daniel's hands and instructed him in their style of defense. The weapon felt strange at first, but Daniel adapted quickly. Varric nodded in approval, saying that a guardian of the Queen must be ready for anything. By the end of the session, Daniel's arms ached, but his strikes were sharper. Varric explained that the weapon was more than a tool for combat. In their culture, it was a sign of commitment. To carry it was to accept the duty of protection with one's life. Daniel understood the meaning, even without the exact words. That night, the Queen held a small gathering in a private chamber. Only trusted members of her court were present. The children he had rescued sat near the center, speaking softly among themselves. When the Queen entered, they stood and bowed. Daniel noticed how their eyes followed her with both affection and respect. The Queen addressed the gathering, her voice calm but firm. She spoke of the attack on the children's ship, calling it a cowardly act meant to shatter hope. She declared that the attempt had failed, and that hope now stood stronger than ever. As she spoke, she placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, showing the court the human who had changed the outcome. After the gathering, one of the children approached him with a small carved figure. It was shaped like a bird, its wings spread wide. Through the translator, she told him it was a guardian bird from their homeworld, a symbol of protection and courage. Daniel accepted it with a quiet nod, feeling the smooth weight of the gift in his palm. When he returned to his quarters, he placed the carved bird beside the metallic emblem. The two symbols, though from different worlds, seemed to belong together. He knew the summit would test both him and the Queen, but in that moment, surrounded by silence and the soft hum of the flagship's engines, he also knew one thing for certain. He would not let her stand alone. Smoke rolled across the black sky as the human ship entered the war zone. Captain Daniel Holt had not planned to be here, but the distress signal had been clear. Children's voices cried for help, and he could not turn away. His small shuttle was not built for battle, but his hands were steady as he flew through falling debris. The burning alien cruiser spun slowly in space. Its outer hull glowed red with heat. Explosions burst from inside, each one making the ship shudder. Through his cockpit window, Daniel saw small escape pods ejecting, but many were missing. His scanner showed hundreds still trapped inside. The voices over comms were frantic, the language unknown, but fear was universal. Daniel pushed the shuttle toward the wreck. His navigation screen flashed warnings about the unstable reactor, but he ignored them. He switched the ship's lights to full power, cutting through the smoke-filled corridors as he docked with a shattered airlock. He grabbed his helmet and ran inside, the air heavy with fire and metal dust. The first thing he saw were the children. Small, gray-skinned, their eyes wide and glowing faintly in the smoke. Some stood frozen in fear, while others coughed and cried. Their alien clothing was torn and burned. Daniel knelt, lowering his helmet so they could see his face. He pointed toward the exit and spoke softly, hoping his tone alone would guide them. One small child stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke. He did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She trusted him. He took her hand and motioned for the others to follow. They moved quickly through the corridor, past fires and sparking wires. The heat was growing worse, and the metal walls groaned as the ship's frame twisted. An explosion rocked the deck ahead, blocking the main path. The children panicked, scattering toward the smoke. Daniel ran after them, his boots slipping on the scorched floor. He grabbed 2, then 3, pulling them close. The smoke stung his eyes, and his lungs burned. But he would not leave without every single one. He led them to a maintenance shaft, pushing open the hatch with all his strength. The narrow space forced them to crawl, the sound of the ship tearing apart echoing around them. The faint glow of his helmet light lit their way. One child stumbled, and Daniel scooped him up, never slowing down. The pressure alarms in his suit screamed, warning of collapsing structure. At last, they reached the docking bay where his shuttle waited. He lifted the children inside, sealing the door behind them. Through the viewport, the alien cruiser burned like a dying star. Daniel strapped them into safety seats, his own breath ragged, his heart pounding. He had no idea who they were or why the ship had been attacked. But they were alive, and that was all that mattered now. The shuttle shook as Daniel pulled away from the burning wreck. The children huddled together, their large eyes fixed on him. He could feel their fear even without words. Their small hands gripped the straps of their seats as the explosions behind them faded into the blackness of space. He opened the comms, trying to reach any nearby rescue ships. Static filled the channel. Whatever battle had torn through this sector had left it silent. His navigation showed damaged beacons and drifting debris. The only clear signal came from a massive structure far ahead, glowing faintly green against the dark. It was the royal flagship of the alien kingdom. As he approached, smaller escort vessels moved to intercept him. Their designs were sleek, their hulls marked with flowing silver patterns. His scanners lit with targeting warnings, but he kept his course steady. He activated an emergency beacon, transmitting the universal distress code. The escorts slowed, but kept their weapons ready. They were not sure what to make of the human with their young. The flagship's hangar was enormous, lit by hundreds of suspended lamps. Daniel's shuttle touched down, and the ramp lowered slowly. Armed guards with tall spears and ceremonial armor stood in formation. Their faces were calm but watchful. The children's eyes brightened when they saw them. Some ran forward into waiting arms, while others hesitated and looked back at him. Then she entered. The Queen. Her presence filled the hangar, not just because of her height, but the way everyone lowered their heads when she passed. Her green skin caught the light, like polished stone. A long gown of woven emerald and silver trailed behind her. Her hair, a deep red, framed eyes that studied Daniel with quiet intensity. She walked toward him without speaking. The guards stepped aside, leaving a clear path between them. The children stood at her side, pointing at him and speaking in their language. Her gaze moved from their faces to his. He could not understand her words when she finally spoke, but the tone was clear. She was asking why. Daniel touched his chest, then gestured toward the burning wreck, still visible through the hangar's shielded wall. He mimed the heat, the smoke, the rescue. His hands shaped the corridors and the maintenance shaft. The Queen listened, her expression shifting only slightly. When he finished, the hangar was silent except for the hum of engines far above. One of the children stepped forward, holding something small in her hands. It was a piece of scorched metal shaped like a crest. She placed it in the Queen's palm and pointed at Daniel. The Queen looked at it for a long moment, then closed her hand. She gave a brief command, and the guards lowered their weapons. The Queen reached for his hand. Her grip was firm and warm. She spoke again, this time with her voice softer. A translator drone floated between them, its mechanical tone translating her words into his language. She said he had done what no outsider had ever done before. He had risked himself for the kingdom's most precious lives. She said there was only one way to honor such an act. She declared the offering of the sacred bond. The translator explained it was the highest form of alliance, one not just between leaders but between souls. It was rare, given only when trust was absolute. In their culture, accepting it meant becoming part of the royal family in spirit and duty. Daniel stood still, his mind caught between disbelief and the weight of her words. The queen extended her hand fully, the light catching the silver designs on her gown. The children looked at him with hope and expectation. The guards waited without moving, their eyes fixed on him. Daniel could feel the enormity of the moment pressing down on him. His answer would change his life forever. The capital world rose before them like a jewel in space. Layers of silver and green cityscapes curved across its surface, connected by glowing transit lines. From orbit, Daniel could see massive towers reaching toward the clouds, their tops lit by the sun. The flagship descended slowly, guided by streams of escort craft that shimmered like moving stars. Inside the queen's private chamber, attendants prepared her for the summit. They wove silver threads into her gown, adjusting its folds until it fell in perfect lines. Daniel stood nearby, wearing the formal attire they had given him. It felt strange compared to his flight suit, but he understood its purpose. In this hall, appearances were part of the battle. Captain Varric entered and gave a short bow. He reported that the rival empire's delegation had already arrived. There were whispers that they planned to challenge the queen's right to lead the alliance. Varric's tone made it clear they might also question Daniel's presence. The queen met Daniel's eyes and told him to be ready for their words to cut as sharply as blades. The summit hall was vast, its domed ceiling painted with the history of the alliance. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat at long curved tables. The air was heavy with formality. As the queen entered, every delegate rose, some with respect, others only because protocol demanded it. Daniel followed her to the central platform, his steps echoing softly on the polished floor. The rival empire's envoy was tall and dressed in dark, armor polished to a mirror shine. His voice carried easily across the hall as he accused the queen of reckless leadership. He claimed that bringing an outsider into the heart of their politics was a danger to their unity. His gaze locked on Daniel as if daring him to speak. Daniel stayed silent until the queen turned slightly toward him. That small gesture told him this was his moment. He stepped forward and spoke through the translator, his voice steady. He told the council that the children had been in a burning ship, abandoned to die. No titles or alliances had mattered in that moment. What mattered was life, and he had chosen to protect it. Murmurs moved through the hall. Some delegates looked thoughtful, while others kept their expressions unreadable. The rival envoy tried to interrupt, but the queen raised her hand. She reminded the council that the sacred bond was older than the current war. It was not a political game, but a vow that transcended borders. Her voice was calm, yet unyielding. The discussion turned toward the war itself. Maps flickered in the air above the central table. Reports of attacks came from multiple sectors. The queen proposed uniting fleets for a concentrated counterstrike. But the rival empire resisted. They wanted to divide the forces, leaving some worlds vulnerable. Daniel could see the trap in their plan, even without being a strategist. When it was his turn to speak again, he used simple logic. He compared their fleets to the rescue on the burning ship. Splitting their strength would be like leaving half the children behind. Silence followed his words. Slowly, one by one, delegates began to side with the queen's proposal. The rival envoy's expression tightened, but he said nothing. By the end of the summit, the vote was cast. The fleets would unite under the queen's strategy. As the council adjourned, several leaders approached Daniel, offering polite nods or brief words of respect. He understood that not all of them trusted him yet, but the first step had been taken. Trust, like any bond, would grow only with time. That evening, the queen stood with him on a balcony overlooking the capital's shining city. She told him the decision today had given their people a chance to survive the war. She also warned, that the rival empire would not forget their defeat in the council. They would strike again, but next time it would not be with words. The days following the summit were tense. The Queen's fleet began moving into position for the counterstrike. Warships of different shapes and colors filled the space above the capital, their engines glowing in readiness. Daniel spent hours in the command center, listening to reports and watching the fleet formations take shape. Captain Varric stayed close, keeping him updated on the enemy's movements. Scouts reported unusual activity along the border worlds. Several patrol ships had vanished without sending distress calls. The Queen believed these were deliberate provocations, meant to draw forces away from the main fleet. Her orders were clear: no distractions, no splitting their strength. Daniel trained daily with the curved blade Varric had given him. The weapon now felt natural in his hands. It was more than just a tool for defense. It had become a symbol of the promise he had made. The children often visited the training hall, watching from the sidelines. Their presence reminded him exactly why he was here. One evening, a messenger from the intelligence division arrived. He carried a sealed report. For the Queen, his face pale with urgency. When she read it, her jaw tightened. The enemy had discovered the route of a civilian convoy carrying refugees. They planned to intercept it within the next day. It was far from the fleet's position, but the Queen could not ignore it. The council debated fiercely. Some argued that sending aid would weaken the main force before the counterstrike. Others said allowing civilians to be slaughtered would destroy morale across the alliance. Daniel listened quietly until the Queen asked for his opinion. He told them that protecting the convoy was not a choice. It was the same as saving the children on the burning ship. The Queen decided to send a small strike team, fast enough to reach the convoy in time. She named Daniel as part of the mission. Captain Varric would lead the operation, supported by a handful of elite soldiers. Their orders were to engage the enemy only if necessary and to ensure the convoy's safe passage. At any cost, they departed in a sleek black Corvette, its engine silent as it cut through space. The journey was tense, each minute bringing them closer to potential combat. Varric briefed them on the enemy's likely tactics. Ambushes, quick strikes, and the use of decoys were all possible. Daniel checked his weapon and prepared for the worst. When they arrived, the convoy was already under attack. Enemy fighters darted among the transport ships, their weapons flashing in the darkness. Varric ordered the Corvette into the fight. Daniel manned one of the gun turrets, firing bursts that forced the attackers to scatter. The elite soldiers coordinated with the convoy's escorts, creating openings for the civilians to escape. In the middle of the chaos, Daniel saw one transport falling behind. Its engines flickered and flames burst from its side. Enemy fighters closed in on it, ignoring the rest of the battle. Without waiting for orders, Daniel left the turret and raced to the docking bay. He took a shuttle, pushing its engines to their limits as he headed for the damaged transport. The docking was rough, but he forced the shuttle to lock. Inside, smoke filled the corridors. He found the crew struggling to keep the ship stable while protecting the passengers. Together, they sealed off the damaged sections and restarted the failing engines. The transport shuddered, then began moving again, joining the convoy's escape route. By the time Daniel returned to the Corvette, the enemy was retreating. The convoy had survived. Varric gave him a rare smile, saying his actions had turned the tide of the fight. They set course back to the fleet, the civilians now under full escort. The Queen's decision to send them had been risky, but it had paid off. When they arrived at the capital, the Queen met them in the hangar. She thanked the team and placed her hand over Daniel's in front of the gathered soldiers. Her voice carried through the hall as she said that courage was not in titles or ranks, but in actions. In that moment, every person there knew the human had earned his place among them. The success of the convoy mission spread quickly across the alliance. Soldiers and civilians alike spoke of the human who had risked his life twice for those beyond his own people. For Daniel, the praise mattered less than the fact that lives had been saved. Yet he could not ignore the feeling that the enemy was not finished with their schemes. In the Queen's council chamber, maps of the war front glowed brighter than usual. Reports showed the rival empire's fleets pulling back from several sectors. At first, it seemed like a victory, but the Queen suspected otherwise. She believed they were gathering for a single decisive strike. Her eyes narrowed as she traced the likely route on the map. Captain Varric explained that if the enemy attacked from that position, they could bypass the main fleet and strike directly at the capital. The Queen's advisors argued over the best response. Some wanted to fortify the capital's defenses, while others pressed for a preemptive attack. Daniel listened, his mind racing through what he had learned since arriving here. He spoke up, suggesting a feint. If they could convince the enemy that the main fleet was chasing them elsewhere, the rival empire might commit fully to their assault. Then the Queen's forces could strike from hidden positions, turning the trap back on them. The chamber fell silent as the Queen considered his words. The Queen approved the plan, ordering her commanders to prepare. The main fleet would move visibly toward a distant sector, while hidden wings of warships remained cloaked near the enemy's approach path. Daniel was placed with Captain Varric's unit once again, tasked with guarding one of the key positions. In the ambush, the days before the battle were filled with preparation. Daniel drilled alongside the Queen's soldiers, practicing not only combat techniques but also communication signals used during large fleet maneuvers. The more he trained with them, the more he felt like part of their ranks. Even the most skeptical warriors now greeted him with respect. On the eve of the battle, the Queen visited the forward command post where Daniel was stationed. She told him that the sacred bond was not just a symbol for the court, but a promise that they would face danger together. She asked if he was ready for what was coming. Daniel met her gaze and answered without hesitation. When the enemy arrived, their numbers were even greater than predicted. Massive warships emerged from hyperspace, their hulls lined with weapons that glowed like molten fire. The cloaked wings of the Queen's fleet remained hidden, holding position as the enemy advanced toward what they thought was an undefended capital. Varric's unit stayed quiet, their ships powered down to avoid detection. The tension inside the command deck was sharp enough to feel in the air. Daniel watched the enemy's movements carefully, waiting for the exact signal. When it came, it was the Queen's voice over the calm and commanding, giving the single word that unleashed the trap. The hidden fleet roared to life, weapons firing in unison. The enemy's front lines were torn apart in the first volley. Warships turned in confusion, caught between the sudden attack and the false target ahead. Daniel's ship surged forward, cutting into the enemy's flank. Every movement of the fleet felt like the strike of a single unified blade. In the chaos, Daniel's vessel intercepted a boarding craft trying to slip past. He led a team into close-quarters combat, driving the invaders back toward their ship. The curved blade in his hand moved as if it were part of him, each strike measured and precise. When the last attacker fell, the deck was silent except for the hum of the engines. By the end of the engagement, the enemy's formation had collapsed. Survivors scattered into hyperspace, leaving wreckage behind. The Queen's voice came again over the comm, this time carrying both pride and relief. The capital was safe for now, but she warned that the war was not yet won. Every soldier in the fleet understood the truth of her words. Asterisk. The fleet returned to the capital under a sky lit by the wreckage of the enemy's failed assault. Citizens filled the streets, watching the arrival of the warships. The Queen's banner flew high over the city's towers, a signal of survival and strength. Daniel stepped onto the landing platform, greeted by the sight of the children he had once pulled from the fire. They ran to him without hesitation, their laughter carrying over the sound of engines. Some clung to his arms while others simply stood close, their eyes bright. In their world, he was no longer just the stranger who had rescued them. He had become their guardian, someone they trusted completely. The queen watched from a short distance, her expression unreadable but warm. The Victory Council convened the next day. Reports confirmed that the rival empire had suffered a major setback. Their forces were retreating to regroup, leaving the alliance with precious time to rebuild. Yet the queen reminded them that a wounded enemy could still be dangerous. She urged preparation, not celebration alone. Daniel was invited to speak before the council. He told them that unity had saved them, not just strength. The fleets had fought as one, just as he and the queen had stood together since the day of the rescue. He warned that if division returned, the enemy would find a way to exploit it. His words were met with nods from leaders across the chamber. After the meeting, the queen led Daniel to a secluded garden within the palace. It was a place of quiet streams and flowering trees, far from the sound of war. She spoke of the sacred bond, reminding him that it was not bound by the end of a battle. It was a lifelong connection, and she wished to honor it fully. She presented him with a ceremonial blade, its hilt inlaid with silver and emerald. It was a weapon of state, carried only by those who had proven themselves beyond all doubt. She placed it in his hands and told him it was not a gift, but a recognition. He had earned his place not just beside her, but within her people. Daniel accepted the blade with a bow. In that moment, he understood the full weight of what had happened since he had first entered the burning ship. His life had been tied to the fate of a kingdom in ways he could never have imagined. The sacred bond was no longer just a title. It was a promise he intended to keep. In the days that followed, rebuilding began across the allied worlds. The queen visited damaged sectors, always with Daniel at her side. The sight of them together inspired hope among the people. Soldiers who had once doubted him now greeted him with the salute reserved for their own royal guard. The rival empire sent no further attacks in those weeks. Whether out of caution or fear, they kept to their borders. Still, the queen and her council remained vigilant. Daniel continued his training, knowing that peace was never permanent. The bond he carried meant that any threat to the queen was a threat to him as well. One evening, as the sun set over the capital, the queen stood with Daniel on the highest balcony of the palace. She looked out at the city, its lights shimmering like stars. She said that their victory had been built on trust, and that trust had been born the moment he chose to save those children. Daniel told her that he would make the same choice again. Without hesitation, the wind carried the sounds of the city below. Somewhere in the streets, the rescued children were playing, their voices rising with joy. The queen rested her hand on his shoulder, a gesture both regal and personal. In the glow of the fading light, Daniel knew the war might return one day. But if it did, they would face it together.